Welcome to the Soul Craft Your Life podcast. My name is Carmen Marshall, and I'm a life design and manifestation expert, a 7-figure entrepreneur, wellness educator, and a dance teacher. And I'm passionate about helping you create a magical and fulfilling life. Whether you want to discover your purpose, learn how to attract financial abundance, or create more health, balance, joy, and connection in your life, the Soul Craft Your Life podcast has got you covered. 1 part strategy and 1 part soul. Each week we explore both the practical and the spiritual with intriguing experts and fascinating human beings, all sharing their wisdom to help expand what we think is possible for our own lives. The goal? To help you create a life you love on your own terms that stems from your soul. Let's dive in and discover what this life has to offer each of us. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to the first ever episode of the Soul Craft Your Life podcast. I'm so glad you're here. So I wanted to interview Steve Jones as one of my first guests on the podcast because of his incredibly unusual life path from bomb disposal specialist and counterterrorism expert to a Qigong teacher and spiritual mentor, which is quite the leap, wouldn't you say? So the backstory. Steve served in both the British Army and the Australian Defence Force for 24 years, specializing in bomb disposal and counterterrorism. Then after his military career, he owned a highly sought-after consultancy business supporting various governments and agencies. But after sustaining multiple injuries from his very high-risk career, including breaking his back twice, Steve had to retire early. In incredible pain and actually unable to walk for quite a period of time, he went on a physical and spiritual journey over 8 years. Steve is now healthy, vibrant, walking completely fine, and is also a gifted Qigong teacher, and he supports many in his community with wellness and mentoring. So in this episode, through Steve's wisdom and his lived experience over those 8 years, we're going to talk about how to change your life and the world by moving from fear to love. Let's dive in together. Hi, Steve. I'm so happy to have you here. I have been wanting to share your story. You have such a fascinating story. But before we get started, can you let people know where you are so our listeners can really visualize whereabouts you are in the world?
Carmen, I'd love to. Hello, and thank you so much for the opportunity to spend some time with you today and chat through a little of my story. I'm living in Australia. I'm from the UK originally, quite near London, and I was in the military for a long time, and then I worked as a consultant in counter-terrorism. And then since that time, I retired early because of quite a number of injuries and challenges that I was going through. And since then, I've been going on a very deep and earnest spiritual journey, which has brought me to a place of a great deal of peace and joy.
Beautiful. And whereabouts in Australia are you right now?
A beautiful suburb called Sunshine Beach, although I must admit it's raining today actually, but it's often sunny. So
it's usually sunny, but when it's rainy, we call it the rainy coast.
and the rain in Queensland can be biblical. It really does rain very hard sometimes. So. But a wonderful place to live.
Oh, most beautiful place, I think. So why I wanted to have this conversation is the journey you have been on has just been incredible. So 24 years with the British Army and the Australian forces as a bomb diffuser specialist and counterterrorism. And then all the things that you did, like the jumping out of airplanes and the parachuting, and then the damage that you sustained to your body through, I think it was 12 different incidences. And then the healing journey that you had to go on. And now, of course, being a Qigong teacher, an amazing Qigong teacher, and also a wellness and really a spiritual mentor for so many people. But it's so interesting, like, how did you get from this bomb specialist and counterterrorism specialist to a Qigong master? There's like quite a story in there. So could you tell us how you started, like some of the pivotal moments, perhaps in your childhood, and then pivotal moments throughout your journey to where you've ended up today? And then we can talk about some of the deeper subjects that I think your history will really inform why you've come to believe what you believe.
Carmen, that's a lovely way to lead into the story. Thank you. Yeah, in terms of pivotal moments, and it is always good to perhaps reach back into childhood. So often, some of those moments can be incredibly formative. For me, I'd choose three moments through life, and the first would have been when I was 12 years old. And unfortunately, I witnessed my father die. He died of a huge heart attack, and as I watched him pass, it was as if he'd been hit by an invisible train. It was a very traumatic and painful experience for him, and obviously had a deep and profound effect on me as a young boy. It would have been easy, perhaps, to have been quite traumatized and affected in difficult ways through life. But as I look back on that moment, it was, in a sense, a simple childhood logic that, as my father died, I realised in the months that followed that we all die. It's a simple inevitability. It's part of the cycle of life. It's kind of silly to resist or fight with that inevitable thing. And as I accepted that death is very much a part of life, I had a sense deep within myself that I had an opportunity to um, really deep dive into some great challenges and indeed take some risks with my life, and perhaps live in a more rich and um, uh, engaging way with life because of what had happened to me. So that really took me on the path to join the military and to become a bomb disposal expert. So I served in the British Army for about 24 years. And over that time, and one or two other occasions as well, I probably had a total of about 12 near-death experiences. And a number of those were work-related, but some of them were other things. So as a child, I actually fell into a bog and nearly drowned. So, and I've been in about 22 traffic accidents as well. So the moments where it felt like I'd managed to cheat the odds were a variety, to be fair, and some of it was inevitably it was work related. But what I did find is that over the course of that journey, and this was kind of number two in terms of key events, is that I really did lose all fear of dying.
Mm.
I guess in a nutshell, I made my peace with it because I came close repeatedly and just accepted that at some point we all do die, and that I was okay with that, and I'd live a full and varied life in the meantime. So yeah, so number two was really uh, reaching a point where I was beyond the fear of dying,
Mm.
and in a sense, with that, I felt a loss of all sense of fear of any kind.
Mm.
I think for many people, the sort of fears that we do experience, if you delve deep enough, much of it's connected to a fear of death.
Yeah, it's so interesting. They say that whether we know it or not, that is our number one fear of dying. And of course, as we get older, it seems much closer. Like we never think of it when we're teens or 20s, 30s, but
Mm.
that underneath that's such a driving factor, that fear of death. And it's so interesting because how you metabolized the death of your father ended up actually being a good thing in the sense that you were probably willing to take more risks than normal. Was your mom like scared too that you were going to like hurt yourself? And then in the army, were they like, oh my goodness, he like takes all these risks? Like, how did people see you? Did they see you as this risk taker?
Yes, and those are two beautiful insights because it's not my lens; it's somebody else's lens. So they're great questions to ask. My mother was sort of quite pro-military because she grew up during World War II, and her father was actually a professional military man. He was in the army his whole life. And she loved all the sort of stories he'd come back with over a whiskey when he'd be chatting to her and that type of thing. As a child, I was incredibly shy and very
Mm.
gentle and thoughtful. So when I mentioned about joining the army, she was completely perplexed. I think as a child, she was quite convinced that I was actually gay because uh, I just got such a gentle, kind way about me, and my shyness meant I didn't ever even speak to a girl, let alone have sort of friendships and things like that. So I guess for my mother, it was a fairly reasonable deduction to make. But and yeah, so it was a shock to her that I joined, and I was always very mindful of not saying too much about my work, especially if I was deploying to high risk theatres where. The bomb disposal stuff was a bit more intense, so Mum wouldn't know sort of where I'd gone to, and I tried to sort of shield her to some degree from those things. The other people in the military, I think they found me rather an entertaining curiosity because I was such a risk seeker. I bought the fastest production motorbike in the world, as well as doing the bomb disposal stuff. I ended up, because I did it for so long, I specialised and supported special forces in that role. So a lot of the additional things that we were doing, using helicopters to fast rope onto ships, parachuting into the sea at night, that kind of thing. Obviously, as well as the bomb disposal stuff, there was a broader high risk profile. But I loved it. I couldn't get enough of it. If there was something cheeky or dangerous, I was there. And I can remember in my 20s and 30s loving the phrase, and it's a cliche, but loving the phrase, if you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much space. Uh, and I lived that. I really did for 20 years. Yeah.
So, number one, of course, the death of your father. Number two, what would you say is your next defining moment that really created the trajectory of your life?
Yeah, I'd encapsulate it with that statement of actually losing all fear, and
Mm, mm,
specifically a fear of dying. And that was a gradual process. It was coming close to death repeatedly, taking risks as a matter of course for many years. And eventually I just made peace with it. And because I lost that fear of dying, I think in a number of ways that allowed me to embrace life all the more.
yeah.
And I can remember that there was a beautiful drop in. I went to a meditation course after I'd retired, actually, and amazing German chap who was facilitating the course. And during the dialogue and discussions with him, I had a drop in where I realised that the fear of dying was very much half of the story, and that the other half of being able to really embrace life is not having a fear of living. And that might sound a strange statement, but for me, I managed to encapsulate that by saying to myself, okay, what are the top three things that you don't think you can do? What would be the worst things that you just would be awful at doing? The last things that you choose to do. So I deliberately sat down and worked out what the three were. And as you know, number one on my list was going to dance classes. Amused many, I'm sure. So, for those listeners that don't know, Carmen is a dance teacher and a marvelous one too. So we actually met at that very first dance class. With my partner at the time being concerned that I might have gone to the toilet and done a runner and not. But that fear of living was actually a much later drop in. But in a nutshell, number two was overcoming fear and how it limits our lives, and realizing that when you can find a place beyond fear, and I think all humans have the capacity to reach that point. In a sense, I think there's an inevitability about it eventually.
Mm.
That we can really embrace life in its fullest and most bountiful way.
Yeah. And it's such a beautiful, I mean, everything is yin and yang and the contrast, but I love that distinction of fear of death and then fear of living. And the question, what am I scared of? Like, what would be the
Mm.
worst thing to do?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and go out and do it, because of course, as you do that, it opens doorways to a richer life, and the friendships that we've enjoyed since that moment have been really expanding, and provides great colour and fun into life. So it's a marvelous thing. So yeah, number one was seeing my father die. Number two was sort of loss of fear. And number three, again, wasn't an instantaneous thing. After I finished working, so 24 years military, 7 years as a consultant in the counter-terrorism field, my injuries gradually became more and more constraining to the point where I could no longer walk. And at that point, I really had to stop in every possible sense. And it really was a classic sort of dark night of the soul, because I was in huge amount of pain for years, very debilitated by my injuries. My family broke up. I was living in a caravan because that was all I could afford. So I didn't really have any money. And I had no real physical mobility. I couldn't work. So the whole sense of identity and role in life had completely shifted. And on a good day, I could brush my teeth, and that was it.
Yeah, and that was for a 7-year healing period, correct? Like it
In
wasn't just
total,
like
it
a
was.
month. It was
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't walk for a shorter period than that, but yeah, it was in total. It was about a 7-year journey trying to overcome those challenges, and that took me on an incredible path. I look back on that chapter, and occasionally I share this with people, and it's quite a confronting statement to make, but one I felt deeply about at the time. In hindsight, it would have been a kindness to commit suicide, because of the level of suffering and pain and just incredible duress that I went through for years.
yeah.
And it just, I did think about it every now and then, but it's just not really in my makeup. I've always had the philosophy that if a day is absolutely awful, tomorrow's got to be a bit better. And for a couple of years, that didn't seem to come true, I have to say. But as I navigated that journey, I used about a dozen different really healthy modalities. So some of it was improving my diet. So making sure that the foods that I was eating weren't causing any inflammatory response. Some of it was meditation. Some of it was Pilates. After a few years, I could begin to do yin yoga. I found hydrotherapy really helpful. So I went through a journey of different healing modalities to try and support my repair. But what I found along that path was that as I went deeper into meditation and spiritual reflection, and I tried to study all of the great masters and the ancient traditions, any source of deep spirituality that could provide me with some wisdom and peace. I deep dived into that for 7 years.
Mm.
And
And I think the how you really came out of it is so profound. But for our listeners, can you share you've told me, but I think it's so important to realize like what was going on in your spine, like how debilitating that was. And I think that also shows what a miracle it was really to be, healed through what you did. But can you describe what happened? Because it's just crazy the injuries that you sustained, not only to your spine, but to your tendons and everything.
yeah, yeah, as I mentioned, there was about a dozen different sort of injuries and conditions, but the prime injury was my spine. So I broke my spine a couple of times, snapped off two of the facet joints in two different work injuries. So one was parachuting into the sea with lots of heavy equipment, and a crosswind had flicked me sideways really quite hard, so that pinged a facet joint off. And then I bust the facet joint at the same level, coming out of a helicopter onto a fast rope down towards the bridge of a ship. So it was a sort of 90-foot fast rope descent. And again, it was really heavy equipment because of all the bomb disposal kit that I was carrying. So once both facet joints broken, that vertebrae was kind of free floating. So spondylolisthesis, they call it. So the vertebrae moves forwards and impinges on the spine. So that caused me a great deal of pain. I then had a fusion operation to bolt those two vertebrae together. And subsequent to the operation, it felt as if the spacer between the two vertebrae wasn't actually large enough. So I couldn't sit for more than about 10 minutes a day. And I was in incredible pain. I couldn't stand or walk for more than about 20 minutes. And then I tried to continue doing physical training, and I know this sounds absolutely insane, and it is when I look back on it. But my whole life, I'd done about 5 hours fitness a day, and running was one of my greatest forms of stress and pressure release from the intensity of the sort of work and life that I was living. So I started running on the beach to try and minimise the sort of effect on my spine and the operation site. And over some period of time, the pain became absolutely off the scale. So they did some more scans, etc., to have a look at my spine and what was happening. And basically, I'd made cavity holes around the bolts where they put the metalwork into
Wow.
the spine. So the neurosurgeon at the time said, look, we'd quite like to go back in, operate, put a more substantial frame around the fusion site and use larger bolts into your spine. And I'd been in so much pain for so long, I just really wasn't in a rush to do that. And just to explain, I know running on those sorts of injuries sounds absolutely ridiculous, but in truth, what I was doing, it was a pressure release for the PTSD that
Mm-hmm.
I'd experienced over the years. And the psychiatrist that was treating me at the time described it as complex and compound PTSD, because I navigated that condition for decades, continually pouring more on top, which again wasn't perhaps the most sensible thing to do. But the physical activity was a pressure release for the PTSD.
Yeah.
But once I'd reached a point where the pain and the conditions were such that I just physically really couldn't do anything at all, I was left with two choices: either suicide or go inwards.
Yeah.
So I went inwards on a spiritual journey, and meditation became one of my best friends in a great many ways. I love the quotes that the greatest gift you can give yourself is meditation. So I meditate a few hours every day, and have done for about 7, 8 years now. So that was amazing. And as I went on the spiritual journey, I realized that so many of the gurus and the teachers and the masters really drove down to one central issue, and it was about living with love. And sorry, I'm a bit emotional about that because it's such a deep
Mm-hmm.
core issue for me. And as I went on that journey for years, I every single day I tried to live with more love. So I'd release the need to control or judge or be angry, be unkind. I'd let go of all of those types of energies more and more each day. And it was a return to love. And I personally believe that deep within us, there's a light, your soul, if you will, but there is a center to our being that is pure love. That we are fundamentally made that way. It's where we come from, it's where we go back to. And that pure love, for me, is part of the fabric of the cosmos. And when we can return back to that state, then our capacity to heal, to grow, to learn has no limit.
So incredible. And what did that look like for you in that journey? Like, what was the first? I imagine meditation opened that up, but the first glimpse of, okay, love is the answer. And what did that journey look like for you? Like the unraveling and the untangling and the just letting go?
Yeah, many things. I remember as I sort of study lots of books and philosophies, and there's a couple of people that I really found great guidance from. I read a lot of Eckhart Tolle's work and Ram Dass as well, actually, and for me, both of those gurus were tremendous guidance. But as I went on that journey, I would practice things daily that would change in flavour. So I can remember deciding to let go of judgment. So there I was laying in my hammock in the caravan park reading my spiritual books. And I'd go, okay, let's spend a minute without judging a single thing. not looking at that dog going, that dog's a bit ugly, or looking at that tree and going, cool, that, that looks a right state, that needs pruning. Not struggling with the way people behave or what they say, and realizing that a minute, let alone 10 minutes of no judgment whatsoever, really was challenging.
Mm.
And those I'd find just individual practices to work on one at a time, and releasing judgment. And I'm not perfect at it. I have my moments where something will trigger me slightly. Although I confess, when that happens now, I zoom inwards, and I
Mm.
immediately race inwards to find what that trigger is, where it's from, what's the flavors, and sit with the lesson and be grateful for what it's teaching me.
Mm.
So the ability to release those things has become really quite fast for me now. And I'd use the simplest of things which pop up often, and I found those great teachers. So I don't know what it is about Noosa. I think it's because it has people that are from all over the world. But Noosa's renowned for people driving around the town and being absolutely awful at using their indicators properly. And it's one of those simple things that just pops up continually to people all the time. And it can be a huge source of irritation and frustration. So what I'd do is I'd drive up to a roundabout and I'd go, here we go. Someone's going to do something random with their indicators. And 9 times out of 10, they would. And what I'd do is I'd allow that feeling and that event to pass through me as if I was transparent. And slowly but surely just let go of it. And although I was using, poor roadcraft and absence of indicators to act as the trigger, I did that because it was simple, and it's sort of something of nothing in a way. So it points quite clearly to the fact that it's you. It's your internal energy and your triggers that are the issue. That's where you need to look, and that's where the work is. So I'd go through a whole succession of different things, in what sounds like very small ways. But I found that, particularly with all the meditation and my daily practices, that over a few years, in effect, I was rewiring my whole system. The way my brain works, the way I live, the energy with which I go through life. So I've reached a point now where I can sit in a coffee shop and I can watch the rain come down through the leaves and the tree and feel a most profound sense of connection to all life, and a oneness with all that is. And with that comes an incredible deep peace and a most profound joy. And those holy instants, if you want to describe it that way, those magical moments, as you go on that practice, you might have one of those or two of those in a year. And then perhaps they reach a point where they're weekly or daily. And for me, I typically get half a dozen a day. And my path is about joining those dots together and just being ever more in a state of grace and living with love. And it's the most beautiful journey. And I marvel at the way my whole world and my life transforms around me as my inner state and my energy changes. And I have complete strangers come up to me and say, wow, your energy is beautiful. Tell me your story. And they can feel it, they can feel the love, and they can feel the peace too. And there's not very much of it around in our world, it seems, with people being so busy and preoccupied and fearful and judgmental about a great many things. But I have a sense that the travesty is our inner energy, our inner state. It's not an external issue that someone's doing something wrong. If you want to fix climate change, then start inside yourself and be a more loving, kind, and peaceful being. And that effect, I think, is ultimately limitless. And I think you can change a world and indeed a universe if you begin there.
And I think it's something we can all relate to, because we know those times that we feel really good, like whether it's after a massage or after kirtan or after a dance class or after a good conversation of connection.
Yeah.
And then anything can happen and it doesn't trigger you
Mm.
because you're happy, like you're content, you're at peace, you have bliss inside of you. And
Yeah.
so I think you've just articulated it so well. If we can cultivate that inside of us, it changes everything outside of us.
Yes.
For you, and I love that you said that initially those moments were further between each other. And then as you kept practicing, they got closer and closer together. When did the light kind of go on for you during that healing journey that you're like, this is what I have to keep doing? Like there was enough of a feeling like, wow, this is the way. Do you remember when that was? Because I think for many people,
Yeah.
they can be meditating, they can be doing these things, but they can feel like they haven't arrived yet. So I want them to hear like how you kept holding on hope when you had all this pain, but there
Mm.
was something that you were like, this is what I need to keep doing despite all that pain.
Yeah, I think I'd answer that question two ways, if I may. What one was an instantaneous moment, and the other was more of a journey. So I used to walk the beach when my body would allow, and I'd just do 10 minutes or so on the firm sand, and just soak up the beauty of the nature around me, and try and be in a sort of meditative state, and just plugged into nature. She's a beautiful doorway.
Mm.
And what I found is that the 35 years or so that I spent working in the counterterrorism space is that what I'd learned to do was I found a way of turning off the switch marked human being. So I could operate an incredibly efficient, capable way. And I understood the emotions of the people around me, and I could rationalize about compassion for what was happening, but I didn't really feel things. And that was a
Mm.
way of navigating a very challenging path, and it worked for me. But as I reached that point where all the injuries had stopped me from doing anything, and I just, I'd take time to sort of be with nature if ever I could. As I'd walk the beach, I would burst into floods of tears. And every day I would cry and cry as I walked the beach. And after some days, some weeks of that, I had a sense that that big trip switch marked human being had flicked itself back on and gone, actually, it's time for you to feel again.
Mm.
And as I walked the beach, feeling incredibly emotional, it was like 30 years worth was just power hosing its way through me emotionally. So it was really a bit brutal on me, but wonderful too. I can remember an instant where I had this flash of revelation, and it was a beautiful sunny day. But as I looked up at the sky, I could feel, see, sense my connection with every star, not just the ones that I might be able to see in the night sky, albeit it was daylight, I couldn't see any. But I felt this incredible oneness that the entire cosmos is all connected.
Mm.
And
Mm.
the way that feeling came in to try and words are always a bit limiting with such descriptions,
Mm.
but the way it came in terms of flavor was love. And it was as if the quantum field or oneness or ground luminosity, all these different ways that um, spiritual people will try and describe the connections, and indeed physicists. For me, that quantum field, that connection between all things, is love.
Mm.
Perhaps that sounds a simplistic way to describe it, but somehow that fits for me. That works for me. So that instant made me go, boom! It's all connected,
Mm.
and I could feel it in the deepest and most profound ways. And I was crying a bit before that happened, and afterwards I was crying a huge amount, but this time with very much tears of joy. And from that point forwards, I deliberately chose to live with more love every moment of my life. So each day I would be more gentle. I would be kinder. I would live with love. And when people were clunky or a bit dysfunctional or, some negative emotions towards me, I worked really diligently on gaining the wisdom to understand why they might feel and behave the way they do, and replace any judgments or reactions that I might have with compassion, so that I was present and conscious and kind, and that I was operating with my heart, not with my mind. And I think a mind is an incredible tool, and I managed all sorts of quite complicated projects. And it's wonderful to have that processing power that our brains offer us. And I think it is just the most wonderful tool. But to expect your mind to run the show is where the problems begin, because our heart carries a wisdom and a connection that's way beyond anything that our minds could ever offer. So if you want to understand your purpose in life, if you want to feel connection to the whole cosmos, if you want to fill your life with love, your brain can't offer you these things. It can do so many amazing things for you, but it can't give you the big answers. They're all in your heart. And the journey was a shifting from my mind to my heart. And as my brain became ever less busy, and that's obviously a fundamental part of meditation, I found that I could come up with so many more answers, and I could feel and understand things so much better the quieter I was. One of the most beautiful benefits of that, and you talked at the beginning about trying to sort of be there and support and be good counsel for people in the community, which is something I love doing dearly. I found that I developed an ever better capacity to listen. And it's one of the practices that I work on every day. And something I came across in my studies, it describes the greatest capacity to listen is to actually almost create a presence and a field with somebody where you listen so intently and allow an opening energetically for that being to be heard that your own mind is completely empty. You're not thinking about what to say next. You're not processing their words in any sort of judgment or trying to come up with a wise response that might guide them better. You simply listen. And what I've noticed over time is that is an incredibly healing energy. And if you can truly create space and listen to someone in a place of conscious presence rather than thought, they've got all the healing and the answers inside them already. There's a wisdom deep in that person that knows the path, that knows the fixes. They just need to be truly heard. And it's like a catalyst for healing. So that's one of the beautiful outcomes of some of that journey. So sorry, that's a very long answer to
No, this is so good. This is so good, Steve, because I think many of us know there's either fear or love. And we know, like, as soon as you start saying like love is the answer to everything, it's how you heal. I think most of us know that intuitively, and it feels that resonance. You can just feel it. But then how do we do it? And you've given us so many nuggets, like practicing non-judgment or feeling our feelings, or just what you said, like listening and opening up where you're really receiving all of their energy and you're just this open vessel, so there's no judgment there. So these are all such tangible things. Like, how do we return to love rather than just knowing that's a good idea? But how do we actually do it?
Yes.
So perfect. So where are you now in terms of the pain levels and from, this journey over the past 8 years? And what do you do if any of the pain returns? Like, what's your go-to?
Yeah, look, I do still get issues with sort of arthritic pain. my hands will get stiff and stuff like that. So there's a lot of sort of overuse, wear and tear type things in my body. And the spine will trouble me if I pick up something too heavy, or if I do sit too much. That's what still, even to this day, that's one of the things that does trigger it. But what I found is that if I do enough good things, so hydrotherapy I still do once a week, and because it's warm, buoyant water, the weight is unloaded from the body, and the jets in the sort of spa type stuff provide a gentle massage, almost in a sort of weightless state. I find that's amazing, and that does reduce any flare up of the injuries. So the reason I mention some of these things, and yin yoga, I find really tremendous, the deep, long stretches and just dropping deep into that moment. So there's a number of things that I do, but if anybody's listening, I'd suggest perhaps don't worry too much specifically about what the wellness activity is. Take a step back and come from a place of self-love. And if you could sit down with a blank sheet of paper and say to yourself, what would be the best expression of self-love in my day? So for some people, it would be sitting down with a great book and a nice cup of coffee. Some would walk in nature. Others would enjoy yoga. There's a huge variety out there, and we're unique creatures. Every single human being is a one-off. So that wish list of self-love, I think, is a very personal thing. And the act of taking the time and the care to write your own self-love care list is also an expression of self-love. And something that the 7-8 year journey of healing made very, very clear to me is that we need to begin inside ourselves. And we must start by loving ourselves. Now, society sometimes might suggest or view that as selfish in some way, whereas the truth is it's the complete opposite. And by truly loving yourself, and I don't mean being self-centered or selfish, I mean by actually really investing in you with love, what will happen is that you'll be a far better version of you. Your frequency will be raised, and your capacity to live well, to live kindly, to live a life of service will be expanded. And as a consequence, the society and the people around you benefit enormously when you reach a stage where you have an excess of love, because you've serviced your own need for love. You've opened your connection to divine love, if you will, the sort of cosmic energies, because you're being gentle and you're being kind. So those energetic pathways are opening. And you can then, in effect, become a portal for more and more love to pour in to this world and to those people that you connect with. So rather than it be selfish at first sight, it's an incredible journey of service. And that's the beginning of an opportunity for real alchemy. Alchemy is nothing about taking some rocks and turning them into gold. It's all about taking fear and changing it into love. That's alchemy. And you can change a world with that. The ripples go on forever.
Yeah, it's so important, that connection, love for others, but love for ourselves. It's so overlooked.
Yeah, very much. Yeah. It's a funny thing. And I think I sometimes when I sit down with people, I've had a few people, quite a surprising number actually, say to me, I don't know what love is. I don't know how to love myself. And that's why I sit down and say, well, actually, just get a piece of paper and think of some really nice things to do for you. And when you do that as part of your daily practice, realize you're doing it because you do love you, and actually you care about you, and you matter. And those small little steps just grow, and it develops into something really beautiful.
And it can go to that next level of the not judging of others, but not judging of ourselves, because I see this so much in my students, whether it's in my dance classes or in my courses, whether it's business or health. But it's not just not having compassion for others, it's not having compassion for themselves. I'm not good enough at this. It's taking me too long to learn this. Why can't I stop doing this? And it's uncompassionate talk for ourselves. And being gentle with
Yes.
ourselves is so important.
Bless you. I'm really pleased you mentioned judgment again, actually, because something I realised as I was working on that practice of not judging others, um, I wasn't really looking in the other direction. I wasn't thinking or deep diving into aspects of self-judgment. And I managed to do a trip back to UK to see some friends, which was a really arduous journey for me to undertake, because obviously it's very difficult for me to sit. But because of all my work travel, I managed to use frequent flyer points to do a business trip so I could lay down,
Lay down.
which was lovely. But for me, I wouldn't have been able to walk if I'd been sat
Yeah.
for that length of time. So I'd have been in a huge amount of pain. But I got back to the UK, and I caught up with friends every couple of days who I'd known much of my life, but hadn't seen some of them for 10 or 15 years. All really super friends, huge variety of people, beautiful connections with them of different flavours in different ways. And over the course of about 10 days, I had a moment of rather wonderful reflection. And I said to myself, wow, these people love me so much. And because I live the other side of the world, they were incredibly open about their big, deep, challenging life stuff. They were incredibly open about their feelings towards me. And after the 10 days, I was left saying to myself, why don't I love me
Mm.
the way they love me? Surely that's okay. And this was a deeply profound moment on my path. In that instant, I felt an incredible sense of forgiveness,
Mm.
and the judgments of myself just vaporized. And I was left in a state of complete forgiveness. And that was the backdrop to be able to love myself unconditionally. And I think forgiveness, compassion, and love almost describe a thread that we can go on through life, whereas we relinquish the judgments and we embrace forgiveness, we then have a clear run at that ability to love ourselves unconditionally. And if you can do that, you can unconditionally love all that is: a
Yeah.
blade of grass, your partner, spirits, unlimited. Your unconditional love becomes boundless.
Yeah, just beautiful. And it's all layers. Like we
Mm,
take off one layer and then we go to the stuff that really runs the show. And often that is self-love.
mm,
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah.
very much. Mm,
So can we also talk about the moving from doing to being? And this is something I'm so passionate about. It's I can't remember
mm,
who first coined the phrase be, do, have, but it all starts with the being. And that's something I teach through all of my courses. And I know that's a big belief for you,
mm.
shifting from the doing into the being. Can
Yes,
you share what you believe about that?
yes. I think this is a rather magical topic, actually. Um, I read a book, marvelous read by a Franciscan friar, actually. And he talked about the two halves of life. And I can remember when I was reading the book originally, I was a bit challenged by the idea, actually. It didn't quite land right for me. But he described the first half of life as doing and the second half of life as being. And he said, look, it's not a numeric thing. It's not necessarily in the middle of your life. The time that it happens is different for everybody. But his perspective on it was that the doing phase of life, when we're working hard and we're acquiring and we're achieving and we're driven by our goals, very, very busy with the doing, that in effect that was like the forging of a container.
Hmm.
And at the right time, there was then the opportunity to change your focus onto being. And that's where you pour in the spiritual good stuff, the love, into the container. And over time, I sort of reflected on his words, and I've come to feel that there's great wisdom in there, as much as it didn't sort of land instantly. And for me personally, the way I've ended up viewing it is that when you watch people doing, it's like they're travelling in a horizontal line. So they're going from A to B to C, and they're navigating their path through life as they do and achieve and acquire. And I think that's very much part of the human journey. And I chat to a lot of younger people who are completely immersed in the doing phase. And I've got lots of interest and energy for what they're doing. I think that's tremendous of itself. But at some point on our path, most, if not all of us, have a sense that there's something more. It could be a feeling of lack, that we keep achieving and acquiring, but there's always a hole inside us that we're missing something really deep and important on our journey. And for me, the being is like the vertical journey. So if you imagine one instant in your life, 1 second where you are doing something, and just pause for a moment on what the activity itself is, and just refocus onto the quality with which that action is occurring. And if there's great depth and presence and consciousness about the quality and the worth of that individual moment, that's being. That's living in a most visceral, alive, vibrant way. And if you can switch the focus to the quality of being, it doesn't mean that you stop doing things. It just means that you've changed the order, and your internal ultimate priority is the quality of your being. Thereafter, anything that you do is simply in service to that spiritual practice. So it's sort of like window dressing, really. The activity itself is not who you are. Who you are is something eternal. Deep, deep down at the core of your being, I'd suggest it's made of love. And that depth and vitality and wonder that exists within that presence, there's the magic. And if you can be like that, whatever you do all of a sudden has a whole new incredible energy about it, and your capacity to do things that might seem impossible comes online. And your ability to manifest, to achieve things that are in alignment with your soul's journey, not your individual human journey, but all your lives, all starts to coalesce. So I think there's true wonder in that shift from doing to being. And I don't think you can rush it. I think it comes in at the right time for each and every one of us when we're ready. So I don't think you can force it in any way. I think it's almost like the blossoming of a flower.
Yeah, and I think it's the journey you go on. Like there's ways that you can access it. One of the reasons I love teaching dance is I feel like people's real essence comes out when they dance. Like that joyful energy that is really them, and a little bit more vulnerable and open. And when you can take that energy into your daily life, it's just effervescent. And I think there's other things you can do in terms of, okay, if I want to have this thing, what would the person that would already have these things, what would they do? Like what energy would they bring to the doing? So I think there's things that we can do, but I agree that it's almost like, again, going under everything else. If you start this journey of meditating and love and non-judgment and compassion for yourself, things just start opening up. They start blossoming. And it's like, what's the one thing I can do that will open up everything else?
Yeah. mm.
Sorry, you were going to say something. I think I saw the ooh come into your eyes.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I couldn't agree more with your words. I think there's great wisdom in there. For me, it almost holds a resonance. So when you picture a future state that you wish to achieve or become, then when you really feel that, what you're doing is you're changing your vibrational frequency to the new state, and it might be, sort of temporary. Glances and insights of that, but you're shifting your energy to where you want it to go. The reason I use the word resonance is that when you change your vibration higher to something that you strive towards, that has a resonance with the energetics around you. So the events that come into your life, the people that you meet, the support and the assistance that seems to come out of thin air, that's an energetic resonance. You could call it serendipity,
Alignment.
luck, if you like. You can call it what you like. But I think that's very much part of the quantum field. It's how everything's connected. And if you raise your vibration to one of love and one of service and one of joy, then you're going to bring in more of those energies because it's a like energy. The flip side's true. If you operate from a place of anger and fear, you will manifest those things too. So if you go low vibration, you're pulling in the things that you're asking for energetically, and that's a confronting thing to say for someone that's in the midst of suffering. And I have great empathy for that. I've walked that path. I really understand. But ultimately, we are creators. I think we co-create with the cosmos, with the divine, if you will. But it's very much in our hands, and that applies to our peace, our joy, and our health. It's in your hands. And that acceptance is an incredibly powerful thing, because you then become a change for good, a force for good, because it's up to you.
Yeah, that personal responsibility is so key.
Yeah.
So a few quick fire questions for you. What would your definition of success be from where you are now and just everything you've experienced? What is your definition of success and a well-lived life?
Yes. Gosh, that's quite a big question.
We could do a whole podcast just on this.
Oh, yes, easily. I would choose two words actually to unpack that slightly, and words can be quite tricky things because ultimately they're only ever signposts. So you talk about a flower, and as soon as you've called it a flower, you've limited the beauty and the wonder of what that actually is by using a word. So I'm always a little cautious about words. So don't sort of overthink what I'm going to say now. It really is about a signpost towards an idea. But people often seek happiness in life. That's something I've completely released. What I strive towards is joy. And they aren't only words, they're signposts. But the ideas that I'm pointing towards is that happiness requires something external. So I want a shinier car, I want a beautiful partner, I want the money to go on holiday whenever I like. These are all external things that we're dependent on for our perceived happiness. And when you get what you want, you start wanting something else or something more. And it's like the hungry hippo. It's always striving for more. So happiness is a little bit of a trap in that sense, because it's dependent on external factors and events. Whereas joy is something that comes from an inner state. So for me, as I went on a path to live ever more gently, to have a peaceful inner state, and to live with love, one of the huge shifts within my own internal state, my own energetics, was an underlying sense of joy.
Mm.
that I could feel my connection to all life, that I could look out the window at nature and feel wonder,
Mm.
that just by sensing the life within me, I could feel joy.
Mm.
And that's not dependent on external things. It's about the energetics within you. It's almost a sense of grace, of wonder.
Mm.
So my path, success. If I don't know, I really don't tend to use the word success anymore. I'm retired. I'm allowed not to use that word anymore. Um, but yeah, for me, the thing that I journey towards, that I invest in, is joy and peace. I think those two are things that we can have irrespective of what happens externally. So they truly can endure. And I've ended up with a sense. I've got a dear friend actually who runs a palliative care hospice here in Noosa, and we have very, very long coffees and all sorts of spiritual discussions. And John, his name is, and John said to me one morning. He said, "Steve, I've been reading some books, and I've come across this wonderful idea." And he said to me, "The question is, what would love do?" And he said, when you think something, or when you go to do something, or when you're struggling with something, he said, I've decided to check back in and go, what would love do? And I actually wrote a meditation about it. It really touched me deeply. I think it's a beautiful reflection and transformational idea, actually, because it takes you from the mind to the heart. That's the magic of it. But yeah, so I mentioned that because that's kind of how I endeavour to live. And part of my sense and logic that goes with that is that my own belief, so that when we die, I think perhaps the only thing we take with us is love. So that encourages me to live with ever more love, because it's one of the most high vibration things that we can ever touch. The Buddhists have a belief that when we pass over, our sensitivity is increased sevenfold. So if you are an angry person, or if you're spiteful, or really negative about life, that might be amplified 7 times. If you live with peace and joy and operate from a graceful place, then that too could be amplified by 7 times. And for me personally, I've never sort of connected into a particular religion. I study them all. I look for the gold dust that I can find in any religion or ancient philosophy, and I find it's an amazing time to live, actually, that we've got the internet and all these abilities to plug into so much wisdom. I think it's tremendous. So for me, I don't sort of have any inclination to choose a particular religion, but I think that Buddhist view is rather interesting. And for me, I don't know, maybe it's times 3 rather than times 7. Depends on the individual, I guess. But I was left, as I sort of reflected on that, I was left with a sense that actually Judgment Day, maybe what that's about is when we pass over and we get that amplified sensitivity, and we do a life review of our time going around the sun for this particular chapter, and the Judgment Day, for better or for worse, is actually a very sensitized look at ourselves. And that for me,
Beautiful.
that landed rather nicely, actually. And I found it encouraging and motivating to do your best, and to live gently and to live with love.
Yeah, just so beautiful. I love questions like that because they pull you so quickly into your heart and you know the answer. It's such a quick shift. So one more question, but it's twofold.
Okay.
What book do you wish was given to high schoolers or elementary school that you think would be so changing and so important? And what book are you currently reading right now?
Yeah, I have to smile because when I was working, I was a complete workaholic. So if I was awake, I was working, and I used to have to study and review a huge amount of written material. And at the time, I was quite proud of the fact that I didn't read books as a sort of pastime, which I think was uh, probably foolish beyond words, to be honest. But now I've typically got 3 or 4 books on the go at a time, depending on the sort of energy and feelings that I have in the moment when I go to pick a book up. Yeah, if I recommended one for sort of people in the later years of school, it would be Eckhart Tolle, A New Earth. I confess I read it 7 times and then I started on the audiobook because I found it was very in reach. I think the concepts and the offerings in there can touch anyone, and it's got such wisdom and such insights in ways that can help you live a better life instantly. I think it's a tremendous read. And I'm not just saying that because Oprah thought the same, but yeah, it really is a tremendous book. And the book I'm reading at the moment, I'm actually reading
one of them at least.
Yeah, I'm reading two, but I'll mention both of them. Actually, they were both recommended by a dear friend. Actually, and they're both they're a little bit out there. So something I've ended up doing in recent years is the whole idea of non-judgment is that I don't vehemently believe or disbelieve things. I'm just an open channel. And it doesn't mean that I don't look at things in a critical way or sort of, ponder and reflect on specifics within concepts. But I don't say no to something unless by chance I know everything there is to know about that particular field. So I'll give you an example. If people say to me, do aliens exist? And I say, well, actually, I've not travelled the entire cosmos. So how can I say no, they don't? And I'm not saying, I completely believe that aliens or disbelieve. I'm just open because actually, unless you're some sort of all-seeing, omniscient being, then you probably haven't got the whole truth. So that's helped me actually let go of a lot of things. So the couple of books I'm reading at the moment, and you'll now understand why I've precursed. So one book I'm reading is The Lifetimes When Jesus and Buddha Knew Each Other, which actually I've got sat right. So that's about a sort of medium who channels 2 ascended masters who reflect on 6 of the key lifetimes that Jesus and Buddha had connections during a lifetime. And it's interesting because sometimes they're partners, sometimes one's the teacher, sometimes they switch, the other one's the student. And the reason I love the book is it's just got some really magical spiritual insights. So I don't have a need to say, yes, they shared their lives, no, they didn't. I just look for the gold. And I think that's a very open, easy way to be. The other book, which I'm really enjoying, although I've had to pause because my partner's pinched it off me and stuff, so I've had to press pause, is Anna, which is about Jesus' grandmother. And again, it's channeled information from her, from spirit, that's been captured in this most amazing book. And if anyone's sort of interested in spiritual or the divine, it is an incredible read, although I haven't finished it because I've been interrupted. But and my partner felt the same, that it really is an amazing read if you're that way inclined, if you're interested in spirituality and the divine.
Oh, wonderful. And I'll put this all in the show notes so everyone can easily access if any of those books intrigued you. Steve, this has just been so wonderful. I have a whole list of questions, so we'll have to bring you back on the show a little bit later. But for now, I did want to let people know if you're ever in Noosa, Steve does the most amazing Qigong session Sundays mornings. So if you're ever here, I'll put the show notes again where you can reach him. And if people want to work one-on-one with you, where would they find you? Where's the best place to go?
Yeah, look, they can contact me through Instagram or Facebook. I think most people tend to sort of use one or the other. So that would be probably the easiest way to contact me. So by all means, put my links on there. And typically, if people want to reach out, I'd catch up for a chai or a coffee, and always happy to listen. And I think there's a wonder in being able to connect with others, share our energies and our wisdoms, and that if you can do that in a really heart-based, open way, we all grow so much faster by connecting. So I think that's a really magical thing, and being able to help each other heal. And I love the Ram Dass expression that we're all just walking each other home. One another home, and it is very much a return to love, and that's, for me, that's the journey.
Thank you so much, Steve, for just giving us so much knowledge and wisdom and little nuggets and just sharing your journey. It's just been absolutely wonderful having this conversation.
Bless you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Hi, gorgeous souls. To celebrate the launch of the Soul Craft Your Life podcast, I'm doing my first ever giveaway. I have some really fun prizes that I'll be announcing in next week's episode, which airs on Tuesday, August 16th. Until then, all you need to do to enter is listen to the episodes, rate and review on iTunes, and then send a screenshot of your review to soulcraft@carmenmarshall.com. You can also get unlimited bonus entries by sharing screenshots of any and all episodes to your Instagram stories, tagging me at Carmen_Marshall, and then sending the screenshot to the same email, soulcraft@carmenmarshall.com. The deadline to enter is August 31st, and I'll announce the winners on Tuesday, September 6th, the first podcast in September. I'm looking so forward to reading your comments, your takeaways, and then announcing the winners. See you on the next episode.